Welcome, friends. It's Ray. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today I'm featuring cards I made with the Simon Says Stamps card kit for July. I'm making 5 cards today. My first card is a slimline card, and I'm taking the pink cardstock and the gray from the kit and cutting them into 2-inch strips, 2 inches by 3 1/4. I affix these together with some low-tack tape and place them inside of the Blossom Fields 3D embossing folder that came with the kit, and I ran those through my die cutting machine and to emboss them. And now here I've taken my brayer and my Hero Arts unicorn white ink and pigment ink and place them on a palette and just using my brayer to ink those up in white. Taking some black ink, inking up my focal panel, which I cut out of some of the pattern paper in the kit. I've used liquid glue and affixed my top and bottom panel to a piece of white cardstock. And then next I'm going to bring in my other 2 panels and match them up. I'm matching them up according to how I had them placed in the embossing folder. And once I have that done, placed an acrylic block on top so that those adhere to my white cardstock. I place a piece of pink and gray cardstock together, tape those on the back, and now I have placed a piece of double-sided tape on the front and a little bit of DecoFoil, Opal DecoFoil to affix those together. And then I will place my focal image on top, affix that with glue, and then trim that down. I take some long scissors and trim off the edges of my main panel. And here I am going to use the white space on my panel to line up my sentiment strips with my focal image. And these sentiments came from the kit, from the pattern paper in the kit. So you see I used put some liquid glue down while I had my congrats sentiment on my panel so that I could line it up the way I want it, because that's the way I want to place it. So here I'm bringing in my best wishes sentiment and adding that with a little glue, liquid glue as well. So here I am inking up the edges of my sentiment strips. I actually meant to do that before I affixed them to my focal image and forgot. So here I am adding some fun foam to the back of my focal image, and we'll do the same to my sentiment strips. I affixed my focal image and sentiments using some liquid glue and placed a block on top. And once that had set and adhered, I then placed my focal panel onto my card base, leaving a 1/8 of an inch border around the card front. And here I am using some Nuvo White Blizzard glitter drops to add a little sparkle and shine to this card. I love the way this wedding card turned out. Card number 2 is also a slimline card. I've placed my craft cardstock in the MISTI using my anti-static powder bag and some Versamarker clear embossing ink and inking up the large floral image that's in the stamp set for the kit. Next, I'm going to use some Hero Arts copper embossing powder to heat emboss. I use a dry paintbrush to remove excess embossing powder and set that aside. And now I'm working on another panel that I'm going to use as a border. So I'm using some Stampendous embossing ink, and it has a dauber on the end, and I am just inking up the entire perimeter of the panel and then applying my same copper embossing powder to that panel, and then we'll actually heat emboss my main panel as well as this border panel at the same time. Now that I've heat embossed my main panel once, the large image does not extend the length of the slimline, so I have placed it back into my MISTI, applied more anti-static powder, and am going to stamp just the top of that image so that it extends the full length of the panel, and heat emboss that. And once I get that heat embossed, then I'm going to put it back in my MISTI and use two or three of the stamps from the stamp set, the individual stamps, to make that bottom portion a little fuller. I also added 2 images to the top and heat embossed those. The Hugs word die came in the kit. I die cut that twice out of 120-pound white cardstock, and am affixing those together with the multi-medium matte glue. I've die cut a third Hugs that I've also heat embossed with the Hero Arts copper embossing powder, and I'll place that on top. I've die cut the Hugs shadow from vellum and placing my Hugs sentiment on top. I place my panel back in my MISTI, prepping for heat embossing. I've cut the sending Hugs sentiment apart, and I'm using the sending, and will heat emboss that with white embossing powder. I'm using Alabaster white embossing powder by Brutus Monroe, and after heat embossing that, I trimmed that panel down and used double-sided tape to mat it onto my second panel, and then will mount those to my card base using double-sided tape. I only released a portion of my double-sided tape until I get my panel positioned where I want it. Then I remove the remaining release paper. I am placing my Hug sentiment on my panel, positioning it where I want it, and will use my Ranger multimedia matte glue on the back of the Hugs die, which I can see through the vellum, of course, and just place the glue on the Hugs die itself, so that, of course, that glue will not show through the vellum. I'm placing 3 White Blizzard Nubo glitter drops on the panel to give a little more interest and a little sparkle and shine. Card number 3 is a mini slimline card. I wanted to mix it up a little bit here. And this card measures 3 1/4 by 6 1/4. I am using the smooth side of Canson XL watercolor paper, and I wanted a lot of color on this card, and I wanted to mix the colors to form other colors. I wanted it uh, rough color, so I'm applying the mini ink cubes directly to the panel, and making sure that I'm not mixing colors that will turn to brown together, and have my squeezed lemonade, candied apple, picked raspberry, broken china, and blueprint sketch. So just mixing those together, no rhyme, no reason, except mixing them so that I get other colors, bold colors. These are all distress inks. I place some water in my hand and am flicking that water onto the panel, or sprinkling it onto the panel. And of course, distress inks are going to react with water, so I'm getting a lot of interesting effects there with the water. I place it into the Tumbled Hexagons embossing folder, run that through my die cutting machine, and now have my brayer and some hickory smoke distress ink, and will actually apply some black on top. Love the way that that raises the look of the embossed image. I am loving that galaxy look. Next, I'm going to work on my sentiment, Get Well Soon. Placed that in my MISTI, prepped my panel for heat embossing, and will use some VersaFine Onyx Black ink to heat emboss with some clear embossing powder. Once my sentiment is embossed, I use a Hexagon die to cut out the sentiment, as well as a black hexagon, same size as the sentiment cutout. And then I affix those together so that I offset the white sentiment strip with the black, and affix those together with glue. I'm placing a 1/2 inch black strip to disguise where my embossing folder ends, and just using liquid glue to affix that. Next, I take my scissors and just trim off that excess black strip. I die cut a piece of foam, placing that on the back of my sentiment hexagon, and use the same hex to cut it out, so it's a little large. So I am just going to take my scissors and trim off a piece, just a sliver of that foam. Next, I'm going to use the double-sided tape and affix my panel to the card base. And then afterwards, we'll use some liquid glue to place my sentiment hexagon onto my panel, and let that set very well. I did get an unwanted spot just inside of the last L on Get Well, and so I have placed some ebony black Nouveau glitter drops in that to cover that up, and then placed another 4 drops throughout the panel and the sentiment hexagon. My 4th card is a slimline card, and I'm using pattern paper from the kit. I've taped those together and am using double-sided tape to affix those to my card base, uh, but didn't have it straight, lifted up, had a little paper tear, but I brought in my Mono Sand eraser, sanded that down, and worked beautifully. Got my panel placed on my card base. I'm bringing in my sentiment strip, which is about 3/4 of an inch. I heat embossed Thinking of You off camera and am now lining that up using the grid on my mat. I lined that with double-sided tape and we'll go ahead and affix that to my panel and trim the excess with my scissors. Off camera, I fussy cut a large rose and baby's breath from the pattern paper that came in the kit and mounted that on foam, and using liquid glue, I'm now placing that onto my panel. Then I'll bring in my Nouveau White Blizzard glitter drops and add 3 dots to my panel. Card number 5 is a slimline card. I'm using Hero Art's Plum cardstock. I've also made a stencil using a 2 3/4 inch circle die from my stash. And here I am lining up a piece of Post-it note tape that I cut to 3/4 of an inch wide, placing that on my panel and applying anti-static powder on top and behind my stencil so that I don't get embossing powder there later. I am going to place a piece of acetate onto the top of the panel, place my swag stamp from the kit on top, and then go ahead and get that situated in my MISTI. And then I'm going to use a scrap piece of paper on the side because my stencil isn't as wide as my cardstock, so I don't want to get embossing ink on that piece of my cardstock. And am stamping my image with Versamarker Embossing ink, and then we'll apply some gold Hero Arts embossing powder. Using a dry paintbrush to remove the embossing powder from areas that I don't want it. Sorry, that wasn't totally in focus there. But that's what I'm doing here before I apply the heat and heat emboss that. Afterwards, I will take that back to my MISTI, and I have used the blue tape to hold the stencil to the panel. So I did not remove the stencil. I just moved it to the side so that I could heat emboss the panel, but I left it in the same position held by the tape. So now I can turn the panel around and heat emboss on the bottom, or use Versamark ink on the bottom, and then apply the embossing powder, move my stencil to the side, and heat set that. Now I've placed my stencil back in position using my Versamark marker to outline the circle and apply embossing powder and heat set that circle. Now I've removed my stencil and am using my ruler, centering it, and using the Versamarker to add a line all the way up the panel and a little attachment for top for my ornament and a little bow. I guess I could have made that bow a little larger, but in the end I think it turned out okay, using my dry brush to remove that excess embossing powder before I heat set that. I used my marker to apply a little more ink and then embossing powder to the top of my ornament and heat set that. The puffed alphabet stickers in the kit are so cute. Using my gold gel pen to color the letters J-O-Y for joy. I'm going to set these aside to dry, and it actually took maybe about an hour for those to dry. So while those were drying, I finished working on my card. I placed my post-it note tape back over the center of my ornament and used some Distress Oxide aged mahogany ink to add some shadowing or backdrop to the panel, and then used a paper towel to remove that ink from the top, from the top of the ornament itself. After removing the post-it tape, I had to touch up the sides a little bit with the Distress Oxide ink. And again, we'll take my paper towel, remove that ink from the gold embossed area. Now I'm taking some gold metallic Magenta ink and going around the edges, applying that to the edges of my panel. I just want to have a more organic gold accent around the edge of that panel. I'm going to take my metallic gold gel pen and just add some gold dots around the top and the bottom areas on the panel. Once that's dry, I use double-sided tape to affix my card panel to my card base. I take my gel pen and a ruler and make gold lines across my ornament, just to kind of finish off that area that was embossed. And then I will go ahead and place my puffed alpha sentiment onto my panel. I'm using my ruler to make sure that I place my alphabet or my sentiment onto my panel, aligned onto the panel. Love the way this card turned out. I used Nuvo White Blizzard drops to add a little more sparkle and shine to this card. This is my first Simon kit, and I really enjoyed making cards with this kit. Let's take a look at all of the cards I made today. I hope you liked today's video, and will give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. And as always, thank you so much for joining me today. Until next time, good day, friends.